Welcome to EPG Pathshala. This module is titled chi-square test and tests of significance based upon the chi-square probability distribution. So chi-square is a very special case of a probability distribution. In earlier modules we have seen T distribution and the test based upon the T distribution. For example, students t-test and ANOVA. And then we have seen F distribution and the test of F. For example, the ANOVA, there are two kinds of ANOVA we have discussed in the F distribution. Today's lecture will be about the chi-square distribution, which is the distribution is actually put forth by one of the father of statistics, that is Karl Pearson in 1900s. So the chi-square distribution is of extreme use if you are analyzing the categorical variable, not the numerical, but mostly the categorical variables will have extreme use for the chi-square test. So there are two types of chi-square tests that we will be covering in this module. The first one is the chi-square goodness of fit, which is more like a correlation that we will be covering the correlation module. The second one will be the chi-square test of goodness of fit, which is more like regression. So if you have a model or if you have a prior hypothesis, you are using chi-square test of the goodness of fit to prove or to disprove your prior hypothesis. So these two kinds of chi-square test will be deliberated in this particular module. So now let us start with what this chi-square distribution is all about. So as you can see in this particular slide, the chi-square is a special case of gamma distribution where the shape parameter is of extreme importance. As you can see here, as the kappa parameter, that is basically your degree of freedom, as the degree of freedom increases, the chi-square distribution changes its shape. So if the degree of freedom is 1, for example, it is typically L-shaped. As you can see in this particular slide, the yellow one is, the kappa is just 1. As you increase it, then it changes, it peaks up, the distribution picks up. So the chi-square distribution is a special case of the gamma distribution. It is asymmetric and its values are always positive. So if you get a high chi-square, that means that the p-value is going to be low, and if you get a low chi-square, that means that the p-value is going to be high. So probably you would like to get you're trying to get a chi-square which is very low, so that you're going to get a high p-square. So if you get a very high chi-square, proportionately your p-value is going to be very low. So there are two types of tests based upon the chi-square distribution, as I've already explained to you. The first one is called Pearson's chi-square test of independence of two categorical variables. So this particular test is to test whether two categorical variables are associated or correlated. So it's a kind of a correlation where there is no hypothesis or no model to test upon. It's simply just two factors or two variables. We are looking, these two variables are covariating, covariable. So that is a type of a correlation. Now, second test is called chi-square test of the goodness of fit of an observed distribution data to a theoretically expected distribution, the model. So observed data versus the model where you expect your data to fit in. So how good the fit is. So that is particular goodness of fit, and this chi-square test is a very good goodness of fit for categorical variables. But if your variables are not really categorical, if you are working with numerical data or continuous data, then perhaps you would be interested to do your studies with regression analysis. But here in this case, it is for the categorical variables. So of course, in the case of any of the chi-square tests, there are few assumptions that you have to verify that all the assumptions are, your data set is actually forming in. So the first one is the random observations. Observations have to be random. Second is independent measurements. The measurements have to be independent and the data needs to be accurate. So note that there is no explicit assumptions about the distributions of populations from which these samples are drawn, as chi-square is considered as a non-parametric test. When we were describing about the T distribution and F distribution and the test based upon those distributions like t-test and ANOVA, we made an explicit assumption about the probabilistic distribution of the populations where our sample came from. The assumption is that the population should follow the Gaussian distribution or the bell-shaped distribution. But in the case of chi-square, there is no such demand, no such assumption is needed to perform the chi-square. So the chi-square test is a kind of a non-parametric test because it is a distribution independent test. So coming to the first test, that is chi-square test of independence as described by the Karl Pearson in 1900s, to see association between two categorical variables. So it's basically a test of correlation for the categorical variables. So here the null hypothesis is that the variables are statistically independent, while alternate hypothesis is that the variables are statistically dependent. So these two tests are being actually, these two hypotheses are being tested with our chi-square test. Intuition behind the test statistic is to summarize the difference between observed cell counts and expected cell counts. What is expected if the null hypothesis is true? That is what you call the expected cell count. So notation is that FO for observed frequency or the cell count, while FE for expected frequency, right? That given that our null hypothesis is right. R is number of rows in the table, while C is number of columns in your table. Now, the chi-square test statistic can be computed using such a small formula. Here it is: chi-square obtained is equal to sigma FO minus FE whole square divided by FE. As I told you, FO is the observed frequency, while FE is the expected frequency given the null hypothesis is true, divided by the FE. So that is how to get the chi-square, which is quite simple. Here is the first example. Is there any association between the income level and the happiness level? So as the income increases, does the happiness level increases? To study, imagine we have done a questionnaire survey and obtained the result as below. As you can see in this particular table that summarizes the result. So as you can see, rich, middle, poor, there are three categorical variables here. The levels of that particular variable is the income here. There are three levels: rich, middle and poor, while in the case of happiness level, again the categorical levels are high, middle and low, and these are the numbers now. So first step to do the chi-square test is to find the row totals and column totals. So simple sum all those on both directions. For example, rich, amongst the rich income level, high plus middle plus low is 615. So the row totals as well as column totals you do, and finally overall total, that is 2955. So as I explained to you, the first step in chi-square test of independence is to calculate the FE. After you complete that first computation of the row total and the column total and the overall total, your next step is to calculate the expected frequency. So the expected frequencies of all these cells needs to be computed as the row total into column total divided by the overall total. So you have to multiply the row total with column total and divide it with the overall total to get the frequency, expected frequency of each cell. For example, the first cell, here it is 272, right? So that number of that particular cell doesn't matter. It only matters your column total and the row total. So here the column total for that particular cell is 911. So that is a column, right? Towards bottom you go from that cell, that is 911. You have to multiply this number with the row total, that is 615, and now divide it, this particular in parenthesis, by 2955 to get the final answer, which is 189.6. You have to do the same operation for the rest of the cells. So it's always better if you do that linearly, right? In one Excel sheet you can perform it. So the first column will be all of your observed frequencies, then expected frequencies you can do. Now you can actually calculate the same thing, right? So finally you have to take a summation of all those things, right? So you have now calculated the FE of all those, right? FO we have, FE we have. So this is yet another way of representing the same thing. In parenthesis you have FE, while non-parenthesis it is FO, the observed frequencies. For example, 272 is observed frequency, while the expected frequency is 189.6. That we got it from the column total and the row total. Now let us now compute the chi-square test statistic in a systematic way. So first of all, we know already the FO, right, the observed frequencies. Now we just calculated the FE, which is expected frequencies. Next step is the third step is FO minus FE. and the fourth step is square it, that is in parenthesis FO minus FE whole square, and finally FO minus FE whole square divided by FE, and you have to sum all of these values on the top right side the column. So you're going to get the chi-square test statistic is 172.28 for this data. As I told you already, it's an inversely proportional. If you're getting a very high chi-square, that means your p-value is going to be very low. Here the chi-square value is quite high, so you expect your p-value to be very low. So next step is to look up the chi-square table to find the chi-square critical value, as in the case of T distribution and F distribution that I have already explained to you how to check up the T table as well as F table and to do the hypothesis testing. In the similar way, here we have to check the chi-square table to find the critical value, for which we should know the degree of freedom and the significance level. So significance level is, as a rule of thumb, it's going to be 0.05 unless you change it. For chi-square test, the degree of freedom can be calculated by the following equation. So equation is very simple: number of rows minus 1 multiplied by number of columns minus 1. So remember that these numbers means that the actual data, not including any totals or labels or headers, nothing. It's only your data, that the numerical value that you put inside your table. For example, in our earlier table, there are 3 columns and 3 rows. So 3 minus 1, that is 2, multiplied by 3 minus 1, 2. So 2 multiplied by 2, that is equal to 4. So that is our degree of freedom, and we have to look up that number in 0.05. So as in this case, as you can see here in this particular slide, the critical values of chi distribution, so you have to go, the column is 0.05, that is our significance level, while the row is as you can see here 4. We have already calculated the degree of freedom for this data set is 4. So the number is going to be 9.488, as the table value is far less than the observed value, so the p-value should be very less, so less than 0.05. As a table value, the critical chi-square is 9.488, is far less than our obtained chi-square test statistic, that is 172.28. We can conclude that p should be less than 0.05, and we reject the null hypothesis of independence of two variables and conclude that two variables are dependent or associated. So both these variables, that is income level and happiness level, are correlated, right, or co-varying. Moving towards the right in the same table, we can see that even at the significance level of 0.005, the critical chi-square, that is 14.86, is still far less than our obtained chi-square test statistic. Therefore, the p-value must be less than 0.005. So even at that significance level, our p-value is significant. That is what you can infer from the chi-square table. So of course there is no support for the chi-square test in Excel as with other kinds of non-parametric test, but you can use a number of online calculators for the chi-square test of goodness of fit as well as for the independence, right? One such a calculator which I suggest you to try is Turner Faculty SWAU-EDU, that the link that is appearing on the module, the slide. Second example is that the question is, are the homicide rate and the volume of gun sales are related for a sample of 25 cities. As you can see here, the gun sale high low, while the homicide rate is low and high. So we have, this is a 2 into 2 contingency table. We have only 2 rows and 2 columns in this particular thing. So first step, as I told you, is to calculate the totals of row total and the column total. Then of course we will have to see the observed frequency and the expected frequency. Observed frequency is what you find exactly, you don't have to calculate it, but expected frequency you have to calculate it from row total multiplied by column total divided by the whole total, so that way you can calculate it. So here it is 2 into 2 contingency table, and here the issue, the one main issue with this kind of small data is that if the chi-square test statistic is, of course it is sensitive to the small cell sizes. Whenever any of your cell size is less than 5, as in this case this is less than less than of course 5, a slightly modified formula is to be used. So that slightly modified formula is called Yates correction for the continuity, and to calculate the chi-square test by hand, right? So the modified formula is 0.5 5 is deducted from the absolute value of F4 minus Fe before squaring it. So instead of F4 minus Fe by Fe, the sum of that value, here it is in parenthesis the absolute value of F4 minus Fe minus 0.5 whole squared divided by Fe. So that particular modified formula is being used. However, you should note that most of the statisticians agree that Yates correction overcorrects it and it is not recommended. So there is actually a little bit catch before you use this Yates correction. So you should know that that is not really a good approach also. So if you are working with this kind of 2 into 2 contingency table, often used for case control studies in clinical research, the best test is Fisher's exact test that can be found in the GraphPad quick calculators, the link given in the module. So all you have to do is that in that quick calc, you have to input your data, right, the observed frequencies into the cell, the empty cell. For example, 73, 756, 14 and 826. So click on it, that will actually tell you exactly what is the chi-square test statistic, right, in the Fisher's exact test. So the Fisher's test work with this particular formula, which is it is quite intuitive. A plus B factorial plus C plus D factorial plus A plus C factorial multiplied by B plus D factorial, right? So all this factorial you multiply it divided by A factorial, B factorial, C factorial, D factorial, and after all N factorial. So that kind of intuitive formula is being used for the Fisher's exact test. So all you have to do is to input that number. So in our second example is a high murder rate versus a gun sale. All you have to do is that you have to input the number and choose that appropriate test. Here we are choosing Fisher's exact test, and then p-value, we are calculating the two-tailed p-value as I explained to you earlier in the module of confidence interval. The p-value, it's always better to go for two-tailed p-value if you do not know about the directionality of the effect. So as you can see here, the p-value for the gun sale is two-tailed p-value is 0.2377. So 0.2377 is a lot higher than our cutoff, that is the critical value is 0.05. So you can conclude that you don't have any you don't have any reason to reject your null hypothesis. So it is not really statistically significant. Next set of test of chi-square test is that chi-square test of goodness of fit, which I told you this test is similar to regression. If you have a model to test, so it's about the fitness of model with your data, right, or data with your model. So to test the fit of observed data to the model or expected data is that particular test of goodness of fit is being used. Formula is very similar to the earlier test of the correlation, right? Sigma F4 minus Fe whole square divided by the Fe, the exact same formula. But F4 is the observed frequency, Fe is the expected frequency. The only difference from the chi-square test of independence is that Fe is not computed from F4 but from a model. In the case of goodness of fit, Fe is calculated from F4. Why? Because we are calculating Fe from the row total and column total and the overall total. So basically this row total and column total as well as overall total depends upon the observed frequencies, right? So and this expected is calculated from, in a way, from the observed frequency, but in this case it's not that case. It's all depends upon the model, whichever model that you would like to work on. In our first example, let us see a famous experiment by the father of genetics, the Gregor Mendel. Out of 556 pea plant, Gregor Mendel observed in his famous dihybrid cross 4 seed phenotypes in frequencies given below. So the types of seeds that he found, the 4 morphologies of the seeds or phenotypes of the seeds are round yellow, round green, wrinkled yellow and wrinkled green. He simply counted number of round yellow, number of round green and so on, and he found that observed frequencies. That much we have it now. As of now, FO is ready. Now second step of course is FE, how to calculate the FE. So Gregor Mendel has its own model of his dihybrid cross. According to his famous law of independent of assortment, Mendel expected a certain ratio in his phenotype. The ratio as per his expectations were 9:3:3:1 for those phenotypes. So of course that ratio is a model, a theoretical expected proportion. So let us plot those expected proportions in this table as well. So in this particular table As the next row, you are putting the expected proportions. 9 out of 16 will be round yellow as per his expectations. 3 out of 16 will be round green. 3 out of 16 will be wrinkled yellow, and 1 out of 16 will be wrinkled green. Why 16? It's the total 9 plus 3 plus 3 plus 1. So all these expected proportions will add up to 1 naturally. So now the next step is that expected proportion. Each of these expected proportion you have to multiply with the total number of observations. So the n, that is 556 seeds that the Gregor Mendel have observed in his famous experiment. So 556 multiplied by 9 by 16 is equal to 312.75. so that way you will have to calculate the expected frequency for the rest of the cell. So note that the total expected frequencies add up to the total. Of course, that is 556. So that will be exactly same. The total remains same. So two hypotheses that we are going to test in this goodness of fit is that observed frequency is same as the expected frequency. That means that our data fits the model well. That is our null hypothesis. In our alternate hypothesis, observed frequencies do not fit our model. So observed frequencies is not equal to the expected frequency. So these two are our hypotheses, null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis. Perhaps Mendel wanted to prove that his data conforms to his model. So basically he want to prove that his null hypothesis is true. Alternate hypothesis is wrong. That is what probably he want to prove it. So you can do the same chi-square test, exactly same. You can plug into that same equation. So FO, FE, I've told you how to calculate the FE, the second column. The third column is FO minus FE. The fourth column is FO minus FE squared. And the fifth column is FO minus FE whole squared divided by the FE. And finally, you have to sum all those values in your last column to get your final chi-square test statistic, which is 0.470024, which is very, very low chi-square. As I told you, low chi-square correspond to a high p-value, and high chi-square correspond to a low p-value. So in this case, the p-value you expect it to be very high. So chi-square test statistic is 0.47. That you can actually look it up in your chi-square table to find the chi-square critical value, for which we should know the degree of freedom and the significance level. Significance level is 0.05. For chi-square test goodness of fit, our data is grouped only in rows, so the column doesn't matter. So in the case of the other one, the independence of categorical variable, so there is actually column as well as row, but in the case of goodness of fit, there is no column, it's only in the row. So the total number of rows minus 1. So in our example, there are total 4 number of rows. Subtract with 1 to get 3. So 3 is the degree of freedom, which is very easy to compute, right? So you will have to look up the degree of freedom 3 corresponding to our significance level 0.05, and our critical value of chi-square is 7.815, which is way high than our observed value. So as the table value of chi-square 7.815 is far higher than our obtained chi-square test statistic, which is 0.47, we can conclude that P is higher than 0.05, and the results are not significant, as whenever you get a very high p-value, it is not really significant. And we fail to reject the null hypothesis of equal frequencies. So frequencies are not really equal. It means that our data is not significantly deviating from the model, the Gregor Mendel's model. The data is fitting well. That is exactly the same thing. So a high p-value means that the data fits model really well, and it is desirable in the goodness of fit analysis. So most of the other statistical analysis, the desirable attribute is a very low p-value, but in this case, because as well as in the case of regression, you should get a very high p-value, because you want to say that your model perhaps, right, your model fits your data very well. So moving towards left in the table, we can see that even at a significance level of 0.1, the critical chi-square, which is 0.58, is still less than our obtained chi-square test statistic, and therefore the p-value must be higher than 0.9, which is quite high. The p-value is quite high. Almost all of the Mendel's data have unrealistically high p-values that led Fisher to doubt the father of statistics, the Fisher, he doubted that whether these values are real or not. It could be even fabricated. That is exactly what the Fisher said. So Microsoft Excel do not support the chi-square test. Online calculators like the one below, that you can do the job very well. So the one which I had given you in the module, which is of the SOX statistics.com, that you can go and check it out, that particular site. Our next example is, does the sex ratio in Bathinda in Punjab significantly biased or not? Here again our null hypothesis is the Fisherian sex ratio, right? The model is that sex ratio is not biased. So that means 0.5. So 50% are male while 50% are the female. So total males are equal to the total female. That is our null hypothesis. While our alternate hypothesis is that the sex ratios are biased. It's not really equal. It's unequal. So now let us actually put that in our 2x2 contingency table. So observed one is 534 and 466 out of 1000. Expected is, of course, you don't really have to calculate it. It is basically out of 1000. It has to be 50-50. So 500 and 500. So 1000 is your expected as per the Fisherian model. So we will have to plug that to get the chi-square, which is sigma observed minus expected whole square divided by the expected, and you can calculate and see that let it be your assignment, which is actually quite simple. The third example is the offspring of the self-pollination of a heterozygote garden pea. The null hypothesis is that the offspring will appear in a ratio of 3/4 dominant, which is purple, to 1/4 recessive, which is white. Here the observed is 290 of the purple while 110 of white out of 400, and the expected is, you have to calculate that from our model. So the ratio is, the model is that 3/4 is the dominant purple. So 3/4 multiplied by 400 is your expected for the purple, while expected for the white is 1/4 multiplied by 400, which is 100, right? So now you will have to calculate observed minus expected, you square it and divide by the expected and sum it to get your final chi-square. So this is one test for the Mendel's first law, which is the law of segregation. The fourth example is the color preference for 150 customers for Thai Superior Car Dealership, right? So you can see that on the category yellow, red, green, blue and white, different colors of the car. Observed frequencies are 35, 50, 30, 10 and 25. Now the dealer has his own expectations. So that is the model, right? The expected model for the sales span is 30, 45, 15, 15, 45. So as per this model, most of the customers that he expect to prefer either white or red. So you can do this particular test. Will the model fits very well for the data in your question or not? So if you have only two categorical variable or two categories like head and tail in coin flipping, or male or female, the gender in the example which I gave you about the sex ratios in Bathinda, you have only two categories, or the Mendel's P, purple and white. So you have only two categories. So in that particular cases, the best option for the goodness of fit test is binomial test, which calculates the exact probabilities for you by using the binomial equation. So in the chi-square test is only approximate p-values, but in the case of binomial test, the p-value produced is exact, so it is a lot more preferable. So binomial test again is available through GraphPad's Quick Cal. You can see that link in the links of the module, so you can check it out. So in summary, chi-square is a very, very important probabilistic distribution introduced by Karl Pearson, the founding father of the discipline of statistics and biostatistics. Karl Pearson is actually originally an evolutionary biologist. So chi-square test is mainly used for categorical variables. So there are two kinds of chi-square test. Chi-square test of goodness of fit, which is like a regression if you have a model, while chi-square test of independence, that is for the correlation if you do not have any model. Thank you.